Hello everybody, welcome to another video. My name is Infiniti, and if you don't know, I'm the face, the voice, and the hands behind all the content you see here under Infiniti Crafting Co. and the website InfinitiCraftingCompany.com. Today I am back with another Sentro knitting machine tutorial at last. Taking quite a bit of a break on these tutorial type videos as I've been leaning more into the which yarns work with this machine thing, but I digress. Over the years, and in recent weeks, I have had many people in my comment sections grilling me about the same thing over and over again. And this particular topic, as it pertains to the Sentro, is actually kind of I don't know if I want to say a hot button issue, but there's definitely two different sides to the debate of whether or not to use this technique on this machine. So, basically, in the last few weeks, I got a comment on one of my Sentro videos, and the person wanted to know about how to avoid curling in their Sentro knitting machine projects. And the simple answer is waste yarn. I don't personally use them in my projects. I'm sure as many of you have noticed. I don't know, it's an extra process that I just don't personally find a use for. But if you do want to avoid the curling and such in your projects and just work with a straight edge, then you will want to use waste yarn. Now, first and foremost, if you are new to the Sentro knitting machine, you probably still have these skeins of yarn that came with the machine. Keep them, don't toss them. They're garbage basically when it comes to making actual projects. But if you do need a Lifeline or some waste yarn to crank a few rows or something, this stuff is golden because it will always work in the machine. So, anywho, before we dive in, I do have a quick word, but without further ado, I'm going to get to that, and then we're going to dive into the demo for the day. This video is brought to you by my supporters over at a.k.a. Hey Craftapreneur is my monthly pattern club, which includes my knitting, crochet, and Sentro knitting machine designs. Each month, members are given access to at least 2 of these designs, as they are either added to the library or updated, and they will have continual access to my entire written/video pattern library for as long as they are members. Membership also gives you the title of Super Crafty, because that's what you are. Members are also given complimentary access to most of my crochet or knitting courses that are published on the website. For example, I recently published a step-by-step crochet course which will walk you through all the terminology, discussions about gauge, and the actual mechanics of the craft. It is a self-paced course that is usually purchased individually, but because you are monthly or quarterly supporters, you get access to it totally free as long as you're signed up for the club. The support I get from Hey Craftapreneur allows me to continue to operate this channel and publish the tutorial content that you've come to know and love. So, if you want to support me and make cool stuff, as I'm sure you've seen under the community tab here, then consider heading over and signing up today after the end of this tutorial. Alright, let's dive into the instruction. Okay, today I'm going to show you a couple different methods of waste yarn. I'm here with my 32 needle knitting machine, because we don't need a huge sample of it. And I have my main project color, which is this lovely blue. Alright, and of course I have my sacrificial waste yarn, which is the yarn that came with the machine. It's just the beige one. I also have a scrap of yarn. It's pretty long, but I'm going to use this as a lifeline because one of the methods for waste yarn uses a lifeline, and so I want to make sure that you're comfortable with that. You're also going to want a darning needle, crochet hook, and of course your snips and whatnot, so you can clean up and finish your work later. Okay, so what we want to do first is we are going to take our waste yarn and we are going to cast on, and how you cast on will vary depending on the project. So if you're following any of my tutorials, you'll know I have a couple different ways of casting on in this machine. If you want to learn my secrets, you can go back and find that Sentro knitting machine playlist, and I will try to leave it linked at the end of this video as well for you. Okay, almost there. Okay, making sure my white needle catches my yarn, and I'm going to drop my yarn to the floor because you often want a counterbalance to your yarn in this machine. And I'm going to just crank up several rows. If you have a knitting machine with a row counter on it. I would recommend about 15 rows. Most people do 10, but I'm paranoid about my projects and any unraveling that may or may not occur while we do this process. So anywhere between 10 to 15 rows of waste yarn will be sufficient for what we're doing today. I should make mention that I probably over measured the yarn that drops into the machine. You don't really need that long of a tail on the waste yarn. You'll want a longer tail on the main color for a specific reason, which I will explain momentarily. Alright, I should be coming around to that white needle. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to pull out a decent amount of this waste yarn. I'm going to cut it from my main skein. And I'm going to go ahead and change color. And you can do so in any way you prefer. I'm just going to do it in the way that I normally do it, that prevents weird jogging in my stripes. Now, as I mentioned before, you want to have a really decent, there's a knot in there, you want to have a really decent tail on this main color. And that's because you're going to be using it to seam together things later in the project. And when it comes to seaming things together with the main yarn body, it's always better to have more yarn left over as waste than to run out in the middle of making your seam. Personal experience. Okay, so now that I have my main color here, I'm just going to crank up a bunch of rows. And I should be coming up, there we go, on this white needle. Okay, so once I have cranked enough of my fabric to the point where I'm satisfied, or however long the pattern states, I am going to pull out maybe 12 to 18 inches of my main color of yarn. I am overestimating my own strand. It's longer than that, but like I said, better safe than sorry. And I'm going to drop it down into my machine and change color again, back to my waste yarn. Alright, and again, going to crank up 10 to 15 rows. This strand does not need to be so outrageous. Getting close to the beginning of this row. There we go. Alright, now I can disconnect my yarn again. And this time I went more for the 15 rows. They might be exactly the same here, but I like more rows on this end because when I do things like this in my projects, I don't like to weave my tail through here to cast off. It's kind of pointless because we're going to be getting rid of that anyway. You will have more issues with the waste yarn itself unraveling, but as long as you're careful, you don't have to worry about that, and it's one less step. So I'm just going to crank a row without yarn so it'll fall off of there, and we can zoom in and get a real good look at what we have going on. Okay. So here I am with my freshly cast off fabric, and this is what we would have going on under normal circumstances on the edges of our work, not necessarily the color change. Though if you did use yarn with different weight, you might have some of the other color peeping through the edges of your main color, like I have here. It's just a side note. But anyway, typically when you cast off this machine, you got curly ends on the top and bottom, and most people hate that. And when it comes to making scarves or other things that you want to sew together, this can get kind of annoying. I understand. So in order to remedy that, I'm going to take one of these ends, maybe this one. I think this is the first side, and we're going to get in here, folding down our waste yarn. We're going to take a look at what's going on right here. Alright, so what you have going on here is that you can clearly see your contrasting colors, and that's what you want, because we are going to be working under these loops. So what I want to do is just turn my work and not retangle my strands. And I want to make sure that I'm grabbing my contrasting color and that it's kind of in the corner of the work. And this really applies to scarves. So if you've ever watched my scarf pattern videos and you see me sewing things, I usually start from the corner. It just makes things a lot easier and straight and painless. Alright, and then you're going to take a crochet hook, and with your main color on the opposite side from which you're working, you're just going to come over here and try to find that first loop, and mine is here. So I'm going to put my crochet hook underneath that. Alternatively, you could do this with a darning needle, but I'm not about that life today. Alright, and we're going to find that other loop, corresponding loop directly across from it, so that you have two loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over with the crochet hook, and you can either single crochet or slip stitch that together, like so. And I'm going to slip stitch. So again, find the next one and its corresponding loop, yarn over, pull through those loops. We're just going to slip stitch all the way across. And you want to make sure you're not grabbing any of the contrasting loops, or that you're not plying the loops of that contrasting color. Because then that'll end up kind of weaving the waste yarn into your project, and then you'll be frustrated and you'll have to carefully snip things out of your work, which can end up in disaster. And if you're curious, one of my pro tips about knitting fabric on this machine is that I usually have anywhere between a 3.75 millimeter and a 4.5 millimeter hook on standby to fix stitches and to do processes like this, because I find that that more closely matches the gauge of the fabric that the knitting machine puts out for most yarns. Now this is actually a 4-weight yarn, so I'm using a 4.5 millimeter because it's a little chunkier and I didn't want to split the yarn. Okay, and now I'm coming into these last few stitches, and I just want to carefully make sure that I get those good and secured. So, got those two. I'm going to work into this one twice so I can get this corner one here. Alright, and I'm going to chain one, pull up a loop, and we're going to snip that. So now I have another lifeline for another day that I can put to the side because that was just ridiculously long. But anyway, this is what we end up with, and you can see that that's a nice straight edge. And depending on which end you worked from and how you cast on or off, you should just be able to unravel that. Now, if you cast off with that lifeline method that most people do, that you're supposed to do, then you'll have to pull that out of there. But because I just went with it, I can just yoink this off, like so. And so really, if you have scrap yarn that's compatible with the Sentro knitting machine, then you can use really any of that for a waste yarn. So you don't just have to specifically have this yarn on standby. I have 3 machines and I don't use this yarn. So I had some laying around. I was like, huh, this is perfect, especially for people who just got their machine. Also, I like that this yarn doesn't really tangle in onto itself because it's super cheap synthetic stuff that has no grab whatsoever. So, and the most resistance you should have is this last row out of here that I am pulling. You can see it coming out just a little bit more, but anywho, that's what we have. Sorry, that's what we have there. That's a nice straight seam. Now, depending on whether you mend things or not, you can get this similar effect from taking out a row when you cast off normally if you don't want to go through the extra steps of using waste yarn. But in the spirit of this video, now I'm going to show you the other method for removing this waste yarn from your project. I just wanted to show you too here, this is why I went into that last stitch twice on the other side. I missed this one loop, which is an easy fix. I left enough tail where I can just weave in and out of here and then pick that up and tuck it down into the fabric. So just wanted to show you that little mishap there, because I like to be very in-depth in my tutorials if you have not noticed. But okay, now I'm going to prep this. I'm going to finish tacking this down, and then we're going to move on to this side of the fabric here. This is starting to feel like a blooper reel, but I just keep finding so many interesting things here with this. So here I am back at the other end. I have just woven my needle in and out of these edge stitches, which kind of look like crochet stitches if you're familiar, but I'm about to tack this down. Now, if you're making hats, right, you could cinch this to make it more rounded off at the top. Or again, if you are making a flat piece of fabric, you could just not do that as tightly. But that was something that I just wouldn't have thought to do otherwise on purpose. So just kind of loop that in. And knot that. Alright, now onto this other side. So again, kind of the same sentiment, only this time I want to work on this fabric on the proper side of the work. So I'm going to find my Lifeline yarn, wherever I did with it. There it is. Okay, we're going to use our Lifeline. Now this piece of yarn is probably about 18-20 inches long. Just had it lying around, so again, really any piece of scrap yarn. And I'm going to thread it on my darning needle, like so, with most of the tail not in the needle, okay? And we are going to look at this edge along our waste yarn and where our main color is. Let's get in a little closer. Okay? And we are going to do something that's very common to knitting, and you don't necessarily need to start from the side, but for the sake of consistency, I suppose I will. So what we want to do is look at these little vertical V's going on here. And you will insert the tip of your needle under the left leg of each of those V's, like so. Now this is a more slow and kind of painstaking process, because you want to make sure you got all these so you don't end up ripping out an entire vertical column of stitches and having to fix that by hand. Or alternatively throwing the whole thing in the bin and calling it a day. So I'm just going to slowly go through each of these rows of stitches. And if you're unfamiliar with knitted fabric, this can look a little weird and kind of, I don't know, blend together after a while. So if you have to take breaks, I do recommend doing that. But I've been knitting for like a decade, so I can see things pretty clearly. Alright, and that's it for the front side. I'm going to turn and readjust the fabric here. And under normal circumstances for this, if I was making a hat that I was going to cinch together, instead of using this Lifeline in a different color, I would just be using the yarn that I used for my main body of my project instead. Yep, left leg. Because that way I don't have to rethread anything, and I can just cinch it closed once I'm done, and then I can pull out my waste yarn, you know? Alright, and I am back at the beginning of the row. Okay, and another thing that pro knitters tend to do, pro knitters, Sometimes when it comes to doing things with lifelines, instead of taking up this first row directly beneath where we're going to cut or rip out, we'll go down one row below, but for visibility's sake today, I thought it would be easier to just do this, but it's totally fine if you accidentally end up a row below. It takes a little bit, like a centimeter or half a centimeter off of the length of your project, but it's fine. Okay, so now I'm going to find the, there we go, this thing. This is the lifeline from the cast on row. And you just want to do a little tugging and searching for which one of these is connected to the cut tail of that. And you're going to go around the edge of the fabric to pull that out. And it's really easy to find that if you pull on it a little bit at the beginning, kind of like I did on accident, because it'll be a straighter, tighter line through there that obviously looks like it doesn't belong. You can just yoink it out. Another one of those things you pick up along the way of working with this machine. Oops. There we go. And getting that last one out of there like that. Okay. So once you get that lifeline out of there, you can just start unraveling this. Perhaps not getting your main color tangled up in the mix, but you get what I'm saying. Alright, and getting to the end at last, it's very satisfying to watch that. Anyway, I'm just going to pull until that last tail comes out of that last stitch, and here we go. Now I have a loose live row of stitches here, and like I stated earlier, under normal circumstances I would just use the main color of the body to weave through here. So you would just ultimately end up pulling it through like a drawstring, or alternatively maybe you did this on purpose and you intend to fully use it as a drawstring. But either way, you can cinch it close like you would a traditional hat, and then of course use your tail to sew together the top of it so that it's a proper hat. But yeah, those are the two ways to use waste yarn, and with this second method, this just opens you up to do either some knitting stitches along this edge, or like I said, you can cinch it closed, or you could do some crochet edging, both of which I've kind of taught on this channel. So again, I have a whole Sentro playlist over there, so if you want to subscribe and then head over there and check that out, I would deeply appreciate it. Okay, I hope this video was helpful for you all, and I have one last word before it is over. If you enjoyed my take and demonstration on waste yarn today, all I ask is that you subscribe and hit that notification bell if you're watching this on YouTube. Make sure you hit that thumbs up button so that the algorithm tells people that this is good content, and you can continue to see my Sentro knitting machine content on your personal page. I typically upload Sentro content on Thursdays, so whether it's a tutorial or it's a yarn review with the machine, that's when they go live, usually at 9:30 a.m. CST. I want to thank you for making it to the end of this video, and until next time, happy making. My last pro tip for this video is that when you get done taking out all your waste yarn and putting it into a pile, you can just take it and wind it into a ball or a cake and store it for later, and then you'll always have it. Just make sure you label it, or you might be able to look at it and tell it's the garbage yarn that you use for waste yarn.